by far, the number of neat calories, if someone can like increase those, then that is a very, a targeted behavior that I will give clients to help them for their fat loss. Because when you increase your everyday activity, movement, thermogenetic, burn rate, which for most people is going to be anywhere from like 100, it could be up to like 600 or 700 calories a day if you are walking around a lot and fidgeting, and that you are just like, you're kind of like just kinetic, moving around, right? Here at my studio, like I'm always moving around. I might, pick up a dumbbell and give it to somebody. I'm constantly moving, like this is my way of storing this. And so I'll move this over so I can take this bench down for somebody, put it back up. Moving around, everything like this is the neat calories. And here's the very interesting thing.
Hi, welcome to the Judy Terrell Show, where I explore topics intended to optimize every body 50, 60, 70, and above.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to your Second 50. I am Judy Terrell, and I am a nationally board certified health coach. I'm in a PhD program for lifestyle as medicine. I've been practicing for 45 years. I have hundreds of clients that I have helped to get healthier and lose weight. And I'm doing this video because when it comes to losing fat, that is still one of the number one reasons why people search out help, from a coach or a fitness person or a nutritionist or their medical providers for that matter. All right. So when it comes to fat loss, we have two sides of an equation, okay? On the one side, there's what are you taking in, right? And it's a physics equation. So what you're taking in has to be lower than what you're putting out, which is the second side of the equation. And everybody is focusing in on the what to put inside the equation. Should you do keto? Should you be Mediterranean diet, intermittent fasting, restricted timed eating? What's the right macro balance? Are you eating healthy foods? On and on and on and on. And all those things are very important. But that's the inside, coming inside of the equation. And in my practice, working with, hundreds of people a week for 45 years, the burn side is a side of the equation that is less explored and I feel like is a little bit muddy, like people don't fully understand. So if you're not really clear on the burn side of the equation and you're focusing in on the inside of the equation and you don't have the right information about the burn side, you can see where, you're either your fat loss, if you're under what you're burning, that's good. But if you're the same or over, but you don't know you are, you can have, no results. You're not getting the fat loss you're after. All right. So I figured we'll do a video on the burn side of the equation because there's a lot of mistaken beliefs, a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding of the information. And if we clear that up, when I clear that up with a client, it usually results in better results, right? So when it comes to the burn side of the physics equation of fat loss on a body, there are four major components, okay? By far, for most people, the first one is the basal metabolic rate or the resting metabolic rate. They're both they're very, very close to each other, so they're basically collapsed into the same. So you can use those terms interchangeably. And what it means is how many calories does your body need to just have basic survival mechanisms going on? And what does that mean? Breathing, heart beating, blood flowing through your body, your brain functioning, like survival level, right? If you were laying in a coma, but you didn't go to the bathroom, you didn't get up and walk around, you were just breathing and heart's beating and all those things are going on that I just described for survival, that's the amount of calories that your body would need to just sustain that, okay? So how do you know that if you are somebody who's trying to figure out your burn rate so that you can calculate your intake to be at a deficit for fat loss, okay? Well, there's several ways to do it. Number one, you find a practitioner like me, or you live close to me, you look me up, because I have a machine that can do it. You breathe into it, it's measuring your oxygen utilization, and then from there we can determine your resting metabolic rate or your basal metabolic rate, okay? If you don't live close to me and you can't come into my studio, if you go online, there are online kind of portals, websites that have, if you plug in your zip code, they will tell you where around you is a facility that you can go to get it done. Okay, Fitness City is one. Weight Loss Near Me is another. I'll put these in the links in the bottom, underneath this video for your access. And you can go and they can just measure that for you. And then you know that. Like, it's not a guess. It is a direct measure. Now, if you don't have access to either me or somebody else doing that kind of measurement, the second thing that you can do to get your resting metabolism, and this is what I do with clients who don't live in my geographic area who want to work with me. You can buy a smart scale, okay? Renpro, Withings, Ironman, Tanita, to name a few. They're not that expensive. And when they do your body composition, they will also calculate a theoretical resting metabolic rate. Now, this is not a direct measure, unlike the breathing test that is, but for most people, it's close enough, right? And that's what I will use. I'll have somebody get a scale, and then I'll have that report come to me, and then I've got a measure of their resting metabolic rate, okay? Once we get that, that's one of the 4 components that we need to know for a total burn for the day, all right? But it is a very important one to know, because another mistake that people are making when they try to lose weight, and this is happening a lot with the GLP-1 medications now, is that if you target your intake to be below your resting metabolic rate, which is your survival mechanisms, then you are going to have downstream problems, I call it, with your metabolism, even though you might lose weight rapidly and lose fat, initially by going below your resting metabolic rate. So you need to know what it is, because that's the lowest number of calories. There's going to be a deficit if you target that, but that's the lowest amount of calories that you can target without disrupting your metabolic rate, creating basically a crisis in your body, which will now create a situation where your body has to cannibalize off itself, going into its own muscle, going into your teeth to get calcium, because you are basically not taking in enough nutrition and calories to, survive, for your body to just maintain itself. So it's going to try and survive. And if you haven't figured this out already, you don't want to do that. You don't want to go below your resting metabolic rate and cause these long-term negatives, right? This is what happened to the people in the Biggest Loser show. When they regained their weight, they had disrupted their metabolic rate so much that now they have to be at a 500 to 1,000 calorie lower per day rate just to maintain their weight. And that's one of the reasons why they regained all their weight so rapidly after they went off the show. But, I feel terrible for them, and I usually tell clients, I don't want to set clients up for the same thing to happen to them, right? So if you're on a GLP-1, you got to work with somebody who's going to make sure that you are not eating below your resting metabolic rate, okay? And why is that? Because that's the lowest number for survival, but that's a deficit because there's 3 other components to what you burn in a day, okay? All right, so that's the biggest one. And now the second one, and usually for most people, the second biggest one is what's called NEAT. It's an acronym, NEAT, and it stands for Non-Exercise Activity Thermogenetics. Whoa, what does that mean? All right, so basically what it means is the calories that you need to just do your everyday activities. Like most of us do not lay in bed all day. We're not in a coma, right? We get up, we make the bed, we walk to the shower, we drive our car and then walk into our building, right? We sit down, and some of us are fidgeters, like we're moving around a lot, just kind of like touching ourselves, like just doing a lot of like fidgety things. Somebody who's got that they're going to burn more calories from their NEAT, from their non-exercise thermogenetics, than somebody who's like very animated, right? So by far, the number of NEAT calories, if someone can like increase those, then that is a very a targeted behavior that I will give clients to help them for their fat loss. Because when you increase your everyday activity movement thermogenetic, burn rate, which for most people is going to be anywhere from like 100. It could be up to like 600 or 700 calories a day if you are walking around a lot and fidgeting, and that you are just like, you're kind of like just kinetic, moving around, right? Here at my studio, like I'm always moving around. I might, pick up a dumbbell and give it to somebody. I'm constantly moving, like this is my way of storing this. And so I'll move this over so I can put this bench down to somebody, put it back up. Moving around, everything like this is the neat calories. And here's the very interesting thing. So when I'm assessing this portion of the calories for somebody, I ask them how many steps. Everybody's got wearables now. You can track your steps. So basically, it's about 2,000 steps for a mile. And, when you're moving around like I just executed, that all gets added up into, steps converted into miles, 2,000 per mile. And we can use an equation of 100 calories per mile. So if somebody's stepping 6,000 steps a day from their wearable, then I divide that by 2,000, that's 3 miles a day they're walking or moving around. And that's their NEAT. And it's 100 calories per mile, so they get another 300 calories plus their resting metabolic rate as their daily burn so far. Those are the two components. Most of my clients, if they're sedentary and they have a day job, or they're working from home and they're not walking out into the world, that NEAT calorie is low, 100 to 300 calories, right? But that's where you can increase it to get a better calorie burn for the day without getting over hungry, right? So if you know your resting metabolism, let's say it's 1,400, and now you got 300 calories for moving around, your NEAT calories now are up to 1,700. All right? There's a third component of just everyday living that goes into calorie burn, and this is known as TE, thermic effect of digestion, okay? It costs us energy to digest food if you're eating food that actually has to be digested, right? So ultra-processed foods, protein powders versus like real protein like chicken or eggs or beans. When you are eating food that you have to chew, the rule of thumb is you get another 100 calories in your burn for the day for every 1,000 calories that you eat, because your body has to do like muscle contraction and things that cost energy to digest food. So let's say somebody's eating 1,000 calories or 1,500 calories a day. That's 100 or 150 calories in addition to the 300 from their NEAT, in addition to their 1,400 for their resting metabolism. So now we got 1,400, 3, and 150, right? 14, 15, 16, 17, 1,850 calories is what an average, my example here of a person would burn if they didn't do any formal exercise, which is the fourth component of our daily burn. All right, but hold that over here for a second. So if you're burning 1,850 from just moving around everyday life, right, and we target your resting metabolic rate as your intake, 1,400 from my 1,850 in my example here, that's about a 450 calorie deficit. That's going to be close to a pound of fat loss a week, right? And this is where people, don't get it. They'll try to go too low and target under their resting metabolism, and that's going to lead to starvation, basically, to the body, and a reaction that's going to thwart fat loss down the road, okay, and mess up metabolic rate. And then the second mistake that people will make is that they didn't calculate their total everyday burn minus their exercise, right? And so they're eating the same amount, 1,800 calories, because they're not tracking, or even if they are, they might not be accurately tracking. But you have to know, if you're tracking 1,800 or if you're tracking 1,500, but you're burning 1,800, that's a 300 calorie deficit. It's going to take you a long time. It's going to take you about 2 weeks to lose 1 pound. And people get frustrated because they think it's not working, okay? And then they abort the whole project. All right, so you got to be able to do the burn rate. So if you are at 1,800 for the day burn, and you can't go below your resting metabolic rate, and that's only going to be like a 300 or 400 calorie deficit, the sweet spot for the calorie deficit is 500 to 750 in a day for what you want to try to calculate as your deficit, right, from what you burn. And now this is where the formal exercise comes in, okay? Or where you can increase your NEAT. So if you are moving around and only burning about 300 calories in your NEAT calories, maybe you can increase your steps from 4,000 up to 8,000 steps. And now you're picking up 200 more calories from just moving around, right? So that's what you want to do, is kind of manipulate. You want to try and get yourself in that calorie burn rate where it's a deficit of 500 to 700 for the total deficit and not go below your resting metabolic rate. So for most people, that means you got to move more. And now, like I said, the fourth component, the formal exercise, that's getting on the treadmill and maybe going for a really brisk walk or a run or taking your, strength training class or lifting weights. And yes, we want to use formal exercise for our fitness, to keep muscle on our body, to keep our mitochondria robust so we have energy, to keep our heart healthy and all these things. But here's the mistake that most people are making. They think they have to do more of the formal exercise so they can burn more, so they can lose fat. And here's why that is a mistake. I'm not saying not to do formal exercise, okay? But what I'm saying is that when you do formal exercise, your body, it's like driving a car at a higher speed. It requires more gas for the car. So when you add a lot more formal exercise, you are going to be hungrier, okay? Your blood sugar is going to drop, your muscle sugar is going to drop, and you're going to get these, drives, hormonal drives and signals to your brain. And this is where people fail. They try to increase that exercise, and that's the fourth component of your 4 parts of your daily burn. But now they try to do it too much. They create too much of a deficit, okay? And then they're over hungry, and then they fail, okay? So, 4 components of daily burn: your resting metabolic rate, your NEAT, or your everyday moving calories, your digestion calories, and then your formal exercise. What I do when I'm designing programs for a person is I'm going to combine, I'm going to try to up their NEAT, right? And then I'm going to calculate a 500 calorie deficit from that. And then when they do formal exercise on top of that, I'm going to try and, most people are not doing, they're doing 1 hour every, 3 times a week, or maybe 1 hour max, 6 or 7 days a week. And unless you're going over that, like I do when I'm training for Ironmans, then I might be doing 6 hours of exercise in one day. That's a whole nother equation. I'm not addressing this video for somebody who's doing that kind of exercise. But what I am saying to you is that you want to add those extra calories, add another hour class at your gym, or, a class on a bike of some sort, a Peloton. But don't add extra calories in for that if it's an hour or less per day, okay? Because that is going to go to your deficit, and as long as you're in this 500 to 1,000 calorie deficit a day, then you are going to be in the sweet spot for what actually works for weight loss. You start going over that, that becomes a problem. You go under your basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, that becomes a problem. But if you stay within a 500 to 1,000 calorie window of a deficit for the 4 components of what you're burning, and then target that intake to be 500 to 1,000, 750 is really my rule, but 1,000 is the upper level. 500 to 750 calorie deficit from those 4 components, then you don't have to exercise yourself to death to get that fat loss, okay? But don't follow the apps that tell you to add calories in for that unless you're exercising for 2 or more hours per day. All right, everybody, I hope this clarifies this. I know when I'm working with clients one-on-one, there's a lot of light bulbs go off and people are like, oh my God, I didn't understand that. I didn't really realize it. And they were either shooting for too low or trying to over-exercise. And especially for men and women who are over 50, that becomes a failure equation right there. All right, you might be able to get away with it a little bit better if you're younger, for different hormonal situations with that, but not when you're over 50. It just doesn't work. So I hope you got some aha moments too. I welcome you to check out my subscription, yoursecond50.life, to check out my website for the different programs for working with me remotely. And, lifestyle is your number one medicine for fat loss and health, and stop outsourcing your plans to, hacks and hormones and medications and supplements. Regain your power by getting the right information about how to make consistent, repetitive lifestyle habits so that you are healthy, living in your ideal body, and feeling fantastic.
And if you'd like to have access to some of my additional resources, I can be found at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and on my website, www.judyterrell.com.